When we begin to understand Surah Al-Fatiha properly, the first realization that should shake us is this: we are not simply reciting words, we are entering a conversation. Most of us have grown up reading Al-Fatiha so often that familiarity has dulled its impact. It opens every Salah, every Rak'ah, every prayer, and because it is always there, we assume it is merely an introduction. But the Prophet F.D.A. told us something extraordinary about this surah. Allah himself says that he has divided the prayer between himself and his servant, and for every verse the servant recites, Allah responds. That single hadith completely reframes what Al-Fatiha is. This is not monologue, this is dialogue. Psychologically, this changes the entire experience of worship. Human beings are shaped by who they believe is listening to them. We speak differently when we know our words matter. We choose our words more carefully when we feel heard. When a believer internalizes that Al-Fatiha is answered verse by verse, the quality of their presence in Salah shifts. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin is no longer a general statement of praise. It is an acknowledgement of reality spoken directly to the one who sustains every aspect of our existence. And Allah responds, affirming that his servant has praised him. This awareness alone can turn distracted prayer into conscious worship. There is also a deep philosophical implication here. Modern life conditions us to speak without response. We send messages that go unanswered. We pour out our worries to people who cannot fix them. Over time, this creates an inner sense of isolation. Surah Al-Fatiha directly confronts that existential loneliness. It teaches the believer that the most important conversation of their life is not ignored, not delayed, and not lost. Every sincere recitation is received immediately. This restores something essential in the human psyche, the certainty that meaning exists and that our voice reaches the one who controls outcomes. Notice also how Allah allows the servant to speak first. Before we ask for guidance, before we confess our dependence, we are invited to recognize who Allah is. When we say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, we are not reminding Allah of his mercy, we are reminding ourselves. And Allah responds, acknowledging that his servant has praised him. This backhand forth establishes intimacy, not distance. It removes the image of a distant deity and replaces it with a Lord who listens, responds, and invites continued engagement. This is why Al-Fatiha is recited in every Rak'ah, not because repetition is required, but because connection is required. Just as relationships weaken without regular communication, the heart drifts when this conversation becomes mechanical. Salah is not sustained by movement alone, it is sustained by awareness. Al-Fatiha is the anchor that pulls the mind back into the moment and reminds the believer who they are standing before. And here is where transformation begins. When a person truly believes they are speaking to Allah and being answered, dua stops being a last resort and becomes a first instinct. Complaints turn into conversations. Confusion turns into consultation with the divine. Over time, this reshapes behavior, patience, and resilience. A person who knows Allah listens does not despair easily, because silence is no longer interpreted as absence. So the next time you recite Surah Al-Fatiha, pause internally, speak it as someone who is heard, stand as someone who is acknowledged, because when prayer becomes conversation, worship becomes alive, and a heart that knows it is heard is a heart that can finally change. One of the most profound yet often overlooked aspects of Surah Al-Fatiha is that it does not rush into asking. Human instinct is to begin with our needs. When something hurts, when life feels unstable, when we are afraid of the future, our first impulse is to ask for relief, for answers, for solutions. But Al-Fatiha retrains the soul. Before a single request is made, the heart is reoriented. It is taught how to see Allah, how to see itself, and how to see reality correctly. And this reorientation is not symbolic. It is transformative. Psychologically, the way we frame a problem determines how we experience it. If you approach life believing that everything is random, every difficulty becomes heavier. If you believe control lies entirely in your own hands, failure becomes devastating. Surah Al-Fatiha quietly dismantles these distorted frameworks. When we say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, we are not merely praising Allah, we are affirming that everything we experience unfolds under His nurturing lordship. Rab is not just a creator, He is a sustainer, a developer, one who brings things to completion over time. That single word redefines hardship. It teaches us that nothing we are facing is outside a process that is being guided. Then we declare Allah as our Rahman and our Rahim. This is not theology for the sake of knowledge. It is emotional calibration. Fear narrows the mind. Desperation distorts judgment. By reminding ourselves that Allah's mercy envelops both this world and the next, the heart softens. Anxiety loosens its grip. The believer is not approaching a harsh authority figure, but a Lord whose mercy precedes His decree. This internal shift is critical, because a heart overwhelmed by fear cannot ask sincerely, it can only beg frantically. And then comes Maliki Yawmid, Deen. Suddenly, perspective expands beyond the present moment. Whatever injustice we carry, whatever confusion we endure, whatever outcomes seem unfair, are placed against the certainty of ultimate accountability. Philosophically, this restores moral order to a world that often feels chaotic. Psychologically, it lifts the burden of needing immediate resolution. The believer no longer demands that everything makes sense now, because they trust that nothing will remain unresolved forever. Only after this grounding does the servant speak the most defining declaration of identity. Iyaka nabudu wa iyaka nasta'in. This is not a request yet, it is a commitment. We worship you alone, and we seek help from you alone. In modern life, our loyalties are fragmented. We rely on Allah emotionally, but on ourselves practically. We worship Allah ritually, but validation comes from elsewhere. This verse gathers the scattered self and brings it back to center. It forces honesty. It asks, who do you truly depend on when things fall apart? By the time we finally say Idinus, Siratal, Mustaqim, the request emerges from clarity, not panic. The heart has been aligned, the ego has been humbled, and expectations have been purified. This is why Al-Fatiha is such a powerful dua. It teaches us how to ask before it teaches us what to ask for. It reforms the inner state so that the outer request carries sincerity, balance, and trust. When a believer recites Al-Fatiha with this awareness, they begin to notice a subtle change. They ask less frantically and trust more deeply. They react less impulsively and reflect more carefully. Their duas become steadier, not because life is easier, but because their perspective is stronger. So before you rush to ask Allah to change your situation, let Surah Al-Fatiha change your orientation. Because when the heart is aligned with truth, the path forward becomes clear, even before the answer arrives. At the very center of Surah Al-Fatiha lies a verse that is short in words but overwhelming in consequence. Iyaka nabudu wa iyaka nasta'in. Everything before it prepares the heart for it, and everything after it flows from it. This is not simply a statement of belief. It is a declaration of how life is meant to be lived. In many ways, this single verse exposes the tension at the core of the human condition. The desire to be independent while knowing deep down that we are not. From a psychological perspective, most of our anxiety comes from misplaced control. We want outcomes without vulnerability, success without dependence, certainty without surrender. This verse dismantles that illusion. When we say, "You alone we worship," we are narrowing our ultimate loyalty. Worship here is not limited to prayer or ritual. It is about what commands our obedience, shapes our priorities, and defines our sense of worth. Whatever we obey unconditionally, whatever we fear losing the most, whatever we revolve our lives around, that is what we truly worship. Al-Fatiha confronts us gently but firmly, asking us to be honest about who or what occupies that central place. Then comes the second half, "And you alone we seek help from." This is where the ego resists. We are comfortable acknowledging Allah as worthy of worship, but reliance is more difficult. Modern culture praises self-sufficiency. Needing help is often framed as weakness, yet the Qur'an redefines strength. True strength is knowing where help actually comes from. This verse does not deny effort or responsibility, it realigns them. You strive, but you do not delude yourself into thinking that effort alone guarantees results. You plan, but you do not worship your plans. Philosophically, this verse resolves a false dilemma that troubles many people. If Allah is in control, what role do I play? Al-Fatiha answers this by combining devotion and dependence. Worship is your responsibility. Seeking help is your acknowledgement of limitation. Together, they create balance. Without worship, reliance becomes entitlement. Without reliance, worship becomes arrogance. This verse keeps both in check. What makes this declaration even more powerful is its placement. It comes after recognizing Allah's lordship, mercy, and ultimate authority, and before asking for guidance. This order matters. You do not ask to be guided while still clinging to competing loyalties. You do not seek clarity while trusting yourself more than the one who sees the full path. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in is the moment the servant steps fully into alignment. Over time, living this verse reshapes how a believer responds to life. When hardship strikes, they do not collapse inward or lash outward. They return to this axis, worship and reliance. When success arrives, they do not become delusional about their own brilliance. They remember where help came from. This creates emotional stability, not the absence of pain, but the presence of grounding. Perhaps most importantly, this verse restores sincerity. Many people ask Allah for guidance while still negotiating the terms. Guide me, but only if it fits my comfort. Help me, but not in a way that challenges my attachments. Al-Fatiha removes that contradiction. It teaches the believer to stand before Allah whole, honest, and surrendered. If Surah Al-Fatiha is the dua that changes everything, this verse is where the change actually begins. Because the moment worship becomes exclusive and reliance becomes sincere, life stops being a struggle for control and starts becoming a journey of trust. When we reach the final request of Surah Al-Fatiha, it can feel deceptively simple. Ihdinas Siratal Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. Many of us learned this phrase as children and translated it narrowly, almost academically, as a request to remain Muslim or to be guided to Islam. But that understanding, while true, is incomplete. If guidance were a one-time event, there would be no need to repeat this dua in every rak'ah of every prayer. The repetition itself is the lesson. Guidance is not a destination you arrive at once. It is a process you must continually seek. Psychologically, human beings are not static. Our beliefs may remain the same, but our states fluctuate constantly. Fear, desire, fatigue, success, disappointment, each of these can subtly tilt our moral compass. Surah Al-Fatiha acknowledges this vulnerability. It teaches us to ask for guidance not because we are lost, but because we can become lost. This humility is essential. A person who believes they no longer need guidance is already drifting. The straight path in this sense is not a single line but a way of walking. It is guidance in decisions, reactions, priorities, and responses. It is clarity when emotions cloud judgment. It is restraint when desire pushes too hard. It is patience when outcomes are delayed. By asking for guidance repeatedly, the believer admits that knowing the truth intellectually does not guarantee living it consistently. Then the dua becomes more specific, the path of those upon whom you have bestowed favor, not of those who earned anger, nor of those who went astray. This is not about naming groups. It is about recognizing patterns. There are people who knew the truth and resisted it, and others who acted with sincerity, but without knowledge. Al-Fatiha teaches us to fear both extremes. Knowledge without humility leads to arrogance. Sincerity without guidance leads to misdirection. The straight path lies in the balance between the two. Philosophically, this request for guidance reframes freedom. Modern thinking often equates freedom with unlimited choice. The Qur'an presents a different vision. True freedom is alignment with purpose. The straight path is not restrictive, it is liberating. It removes the burden of constantly redefining right and wrong based on circumstance or desire. It offers coherence in a fragmented world. This dua also changes how we interpret life events. When a believer sincerely asks for guidance, they begin to see moments of difficulty differently. A closed door may not be rejection, it may be redirection. A delay may not be punishment, it may be protection. Guidance is not only found in clarity, but sometimes in prevention. Over time, this cultivates trust. Not blind optimism, but grounded reliance on divine wisdom. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of this request is that it keeps the believer teachable. No matter how much knowledge a person gains, no matter how long they have been practicing, they stand in prayer asking for guidance like a beginner. This protects the heart from rigidity and spiritual arrogance. It keeps faith alive, flexible, and sincere. When Surah Al-Fatiha is recited with this awareness, it no longer feels repetitive, it feels necessary. Each recitation becomes a checkpoint, a recalibration, a return to center. You are not merely asking Allah to show you the path, you are asking Him to keep you walking it. And that is what makes this dua change everything. Because a person who asks for guidance sincerely, consistently, and humbly will never remain lost for long, even when the road ahead is unclear.